Good evening, folks. Thank you all for coming out to Milford City Hall on a cold night. It's nice out. City Hall, by the way, is 100 years old this year, and our town of about 55,000 people dates back to 1639. In Milford, we are very proud of several things. We're very proud of our 17 and a half miles of coastline. It is the longest coastline in the state. It is one of our greatest resources, one of our most terrific assets, but at the same time, it's one of those significant vulnerabilities that we have. And we've seen that over the course of the last 5 years with Storm Sandy and Storm Irene. We were walloped. We sustained tremendous devastation, tremendous destruction from Woodmont over at Hawley Beach all the way on the west end of Milford, Smith's Point. There were houses that were washed out to sea, houses that were structurally compromised, houses that just collapsed. We had thousands of people, especially after Storm Irene, that were displaced. A lot of those folks still are not back in the neighborhoods over 3 years later from Storm Sandy. We have, I think, about 2,000 homes that were affected from Storm Sandy. Some of those were very minor issues, but we still had lots and lots of homes and properties that are rebuilding as we speak today. For the last 4 years, my focus has been trying to get those people that have been displaced back into their homes. At the same time, the city has been laser focused, not just on the short term, but on the long term too, making sure that our homes are protected 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future. We have been looking at making our shoreline especially more resilient, our coastline harder and stronger than it ever has been, because climate change is real. Sea rise is something that we have to expect, and if we don't prepare for the worst, it's going to be an issue. So from one end of our coast to the next, we have lots of projects. We are working with our federal friends, our state friends, trying to get as much grant money as possible. At the same time, we're utilizing local money to make sure that each section of our beach has been hardened, has been made more resilient so that it can withstand these 100-year storms that we seem to be getting each and every year. So one of the grants that we've gotten, a $150,000 grant, is for study and design to make our community more resilient. This grant actually is a grant that we're participating with two other coastline towns in the region, Brantford and Madison. And Malone McBroom is our consultant. They're also the consultant that we have on another $700,000 grant with 10 towns that we're participating with the Nature Conservancy. But there's lots of studies, lots of grants, lots of projects. This week, the governor just announced that Connecticut got $55 million from the Build by Design competition. It is administered by HUD. Of that, approximately $18 million has been designated for more study and design for New Haven and Fairfield County shoreline communities. I think it goes a little bit beyond the shoreline to some intercoastal communities as well, but there's going to be lots of efforts, lots of resources locally, at the state and federally over the next many years to make sure that the people in this room that have an investment in our shoreline, really our whole town, our whole region, our whole state has a huge investment in this resource, to make sure that that's available to our children and our children's children. So I'd like to introduce Joe Griffith. Joe wears many hats, but among them, he is our DPLU director and our floodplain manager. So with that, I'll allow him to introduce some of the other people on our team that we have here too, sitting to my left, as well as our consultants from Malone McBroom. Joe?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. I'd like to also welcome you to tonight's meeting. I suspect most of you may be familiar with the public hearing format and Robert's Rules of Orders and what have you through Planning and Zoning, through Zoning Board of Appeals. It's not one of these meetings tonight. This is a workshop. We're looking to try and open this up and engage everyone with your ideas, your experiences, your suggestions. Just keep that in mind. This is an informal meeting. We're looking to get your input out of this. I'd like to introduce the people here tonight who are part of Milford's Hazard Mitigation Committee, who have been working with our consultants, Mary Rose Palumbo, Meg McGaffin, Steve Johnson, and the chair of our Hazard Mitigation Committee and the deputy director of our Emergency Preparedness, Bill Richards. Also here are our consultants, Malone and McBroom, they're professional engineers, Dave Murphy, and Noah Slovan. Also, their consultant, floodplain manager, Scott Choquette. And as the mayor had indicated, the meeting tonight is part of a grant-funded program that Milford is participating in, along with Branford and Madison. All three towns are working with our professional engineers, Malone and McBroom, and their consultants to explore ideas for coastal resiliency. Mr. Murphy will be presenting tonight the criteria and considerations for assessing the vulnerability and risk, which is a necessary step in developing the designs for coastal resiliency. The development of this coastal resiliency plan is the goal of this program and is expected to become an integral part of the hazard mitigation plan. We're also planning a second meeting at the end of March in which we will be presenting the draft of this plan, discussing the designs for implementing the objectives that we're presenting tonight. Between tonight's meeting and our second meeting in March, we'll be soliciting your input with an online survey, which Dave will be describing as part of his presentation tonight. I'd ask everybody to please participate in this survey. It'll be available online. If you don't have access to a computer, contact our office. We'll get you the paper form, but please participate. That one, yes. Shortly before the MARC workshop, we will be planning on putting links to the draft of the resiliency plan in for review with the hopes that the people that are here tonight, as well as your neighbors, will attend our meeting in March and provide comments on that draft plan. As I had indicated, tonight's workshop will be the greatest value if it serves to initiate a dialogue with you, the public, and hopefully will extend beyond tonight and into the next few months. I've left some of my business cards in the back and encourage anyone with ideas or questions to email me in the coming months, and we'd like to engage everyone who has an interest in this dialogue. I'd also note, as Milford's point of contact in this workshop, I've been contacted by several residents and business persons who've expressed an interest in becoming involved. After Mr. Murphy's presentation, I would ask any of these people, Grammy, to please introduce yourselves and talk about what services you can provide. I'll now turn it over to Dave Murphy of Malone and McBroom to make his presentation, after which I believe we'll open this up to questions and comments. And I'll also note that this presentation will be available through the city's website online, and so anybody who's not able to make it here tonight will have access to these to this PowerPoint. So, Dave, please.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see a good turnout tonight. Scott Choquette from Dewberry will be doing a little bit of this presentation, so you won't have to listen to me the whole time. But I think since everyone's been introduced, I'll jump right in. Again, this is a data gathering session. We want to hear your comments. We don't have the answers tonight. So I want to make sure that's clear. You might have questions that we'll have to just take down and get back to you later. You may have some questions at the end that we can answer, so we'll try to. But by and large, this is a data gathering session as we start off this process. So here's a quick agenda for tonight. We'll go through and talk about how this project was funded. What is resilience? We'll talk about what's resilience, what's risk. What are these words? They're closely related, but it's good to understand what we're talking about before we try to come up with solutions, right? How do we identify risk? What's vulnerable in the city, and how can we make those things that are vulnerable less vulnerable over time. We'll do an introduction, really, options to adapt to sea level rise and increasing coastal hazards over time, how to become more resilient. We won't give away all the answers because we don't have them yet. We need to hear from you first. Then we'll end with next steps and a discussion at the end. So the project funding, the mayor and Mr. Griffith both mentioned this is part of a grant that's shared with 2 other towns, Madison and Brantford. And that is true. It's a grant for $150,000 from HUD. It's post-Sandy money that was allocated to U.S. HUD and then passed down to the Connecticut Department of Housing. And because it's a grant from HUD, it's called the Community Development Block Grant. It's typically geared towards communities that have some low to moderate income housing, and that is true in most of the towns in Connecticut, Milford, of course, as well. And there are some low moderate income census tracts in Milford that make the city eligible to have this grant. And some of them are coastal, which is great. So Wildomar Beach, Point Beach, and some of the areas are not coastal, but by and large, Milford is a coastal community. So having these neighborhoods makes this town in Brantford and Madison, believe it or not, eligible for this grant. In case you didn't know, Milford is very proactive in planning for all hazards, not just coastal hazards. And this graphic attempts to show how some of these planning efforts and studies are related. So I hope it makes some sense. And our job as part of this grant is to interface with those other plans. It's required, actually, per our grant application for this project that we interface with other efforts going on. So the city has a hazard mitigation plan, in case you didn't know. That's sort of the outer box there, and the hazard mitigation plan addresses flooding and coastal hazards as well as other kinds of hazards, such as winter storms, tornadoes, that sort of thing. So that's our outer box. So inside the outer box is this coastal resilience plan, which covers all sorts of coastal risk issues in Milford. Inside that big inside box, Milford Coastal Resilience Plan, you can see a couple other things. There's a dotted line rectangle on the right-hand side, which is that 10-town regional coastal resilience effort that the mayor mentioned. That is a grant that's held by the Council of Governments, and that one really focuses on natural shorelines, living shorelines, that kind of thing, beaches and dunes. So in our overall plan, we can look at seawalls and bulkheads and hard structures, whereas that grant is focusing on living shorelines and soft structures. The city also has a FEMA Community Rating System, CRS plan, which is all about property insurance and how to lower property insurance premium. Sorry, not property insurance. That would be nice, right? Flood insurance premiums. We can't control those. And then you'll see lots of little boxes in the graphic that show that the city is working on a lot of things. Drainage improvements, which have been bonded, FEMA grants for acquiring and elevating homes, that sort of thing. So there's a lot going on. We're just trying to show how it's all related there. So this project, again, this citywide coastal resilience plan, these are the steps. It's our job to look at existing capabilities, what can the city already do and what do they need help with, coordinate with those other plans like the regional coastal resilience plan, which is about soft solutions. We do some data collection, some risk assessment, which is what we'll be talking about tonight. We'll review options to become more resilient over time. Public information meetings are a part of our planning process. We're going to be looking at specific neighborhoods that had the most severe impacts from Sandy and Irene and selecting a couple of those to work with on a more detailed level. We'll put together a plan document, an implementation process, identify funding sources so that the plan doesn't just sit and not get used. And actually what's great as part of this project, and we don't always get to do this, but we can do a couple concept level designs. So not shovel-ready designs, but we can do some concept level designs so that the city can use them to apply for funding, right? Funding agencies like to know that you're thinking about something. If you could take them a concept level design, that puts you in a position to get funding later on. So that's the last part of our scope. So I'll let you know, not only is Milford very busy with all of its different planning at different scales, hazard mitigation, coastal resilience, and otherwise, they also are very capable because of that. The city right now holds a lot of grants in hand, and the mayor mentioned a couple of them. Joe mentioned a couple of them. And they're grants that address site-specific to neighborhood level to citywide resilience issues. So don't worry too much about all the details on this slide. It'll be on the website starting tomorrow, this whole presentation. But just understand that the city has a lot of grants in hand to address coastal issues. And the city also will be starting to update its hazard mitigation plan next year. The plans have to be updated every 5 years. And we want to take this opportunity to tell you that when it's time to update the hazard mitigation plan next year, there are many aspects of that plan that are coastal in nature, so please participate. So a year from now, if you see a little press release for the hazard mitigation plan, preliminary meetings, definitely come out and you can talk about coastal issues and the next tornado that's going to occur. So that's all great background. What is resilience? So community resilience means being able to prepare, adapt, withstand, and recover. It's like having a resilient family, right? If the power goes out, what do you do to get through that? Well, if you've prepared and adapted over time, you can withstand that power outage and you can recover. That's resilience on an individual level, but a community can be resilient as well. So coastal resilience is taking those four things, preparing, adapting, withstanding, recovering, and looking at them through the lens of high tide flooding, which really plagues many of you already, once a month or a couple times a year, sea level rise, storm surges like from Sandy and Irene, and erosion, which is something that is really a problem in some parts of the city. So for those of you who like graphics, we have a graph. Remember algebra or geometry, or I can't even remember where you learned this, but the x-axis is time. So as you go to the right, that's time. And then the y-axis is an event. So an event occurs, that's the red arrow. And when that happens, there's a drop in capability or quality of life. There's some loss that occurs. That's the bottom of that dip. And then it takes a while to recover from that loss after the event. So that event could have been Sandy or Irene, or it could be some other weather event. And when you've come back to that line in the middle, that dotted line, then you've recovered, right? That's your recovery. So if you become more resilient, you bring that recovery to the left. You make it more rapid. And you do that by doing a few things. You can prepare, which brings you to a higher level of being in the first place. See, the prepare is on a diagonal line that goes up. So when the event occurs, you've already started at a higher level of capability. You've also adapted and made some other changes so that you can take that recovery time and really move it to the left. If you're not maybe mathematical and you don't like graphs, this one may be better, maybe your speed. So resilience is really reducing that time to recovery. So a building that might take almost 2 years to recover after a flood, if it's been elevated or some flood control has been put in place around it, you may that top red arrow that goes to the left, you might change your recovery time from 2 years to just a few days or maybe no time at all. So that's what it means to become more resilient. So some more math. Math is great. Risk. What is risk? Well, risk is two things. It's if something's vulnerable and if it's frequent. So something that doesn't happen often, the risk is low, right? Something that happens very frequently, the risk can be high. All right, what about the other side of the equation? If something's not vulnerable at all, you're living on a big mountain of bedrock, so the flooding's not going to get you, then the risk is low. If something's very vulnerable, the risk can be high. So we have to remember those two sides of the equation when we think about Milford's infrastructure and people, the things that we have to think about as part of this grant. And there's a little graphic there on the bottom. So things that have high frequency and high vulnerability might be very susceptible to damage from a flood. And then maybe, like if you look in the middle one, wildfires, it's less frequent, and we're typically less vulnerable because we have a lot of fire protection in place. So that has kind of a different position in that risk matrix. So start to think about this a little bit. This will be important in a couple slides. If you saw bear attack on the previous one, right? That's not part of this plan. So this plan's coastal risk. So this is the same matrix, but now we have coastal-related issues in it. So drainage infrastructure is flooded pretty frequently in Milford, right? A very high tide will cause flooding, and if it's coupled with a lot of rain, that's high frequency and high vulnerability and high risk. Whereas erosion of inland areas, which could be a coastal hazard, right, is not so much a concern in Milford. So it's in the low vulnerability, low frequency box there. But in between, you can see lots of other things that have various levels of risk. The wastewater plants, for example, they're not as vulnerable, right? Because we build them to be strong, right? We don't want them to be vulnerable. But they may be flooded once in a while, so they have sort of a medium risk profile. So we'll be looking at that sort of thing. And we'll be linking that up with major storms, chronic storms, like the Hurricane Lee, Irene, and Sandy. I said Lee because I was just in the Catskills a couple days ago. And then daily high tide, which already floods areas like near Penn Meadow Creek. Frequency is changing. Why is frequency changing? Does anybody know? So we know just from measuring it, right? We don't even need climate models to tell us that sea level's been rising. We know this from gauges that have been installed in place since the Long Island Express hurricane of 1938. So, and the rate's been about 2 millimeters a year, and what that's doing is it's causing some of our more chronic nuisance-related flooding to be more frequent. So places that maybe it was just a bother to drive through the puddle 10, 15 years ago, now it's kind of more of a pain in the neck to get through a larger span that's flooded on a road. So we don't know exactly what's happening. You know, here's a trend line, but we believe that at least historic rate's going to continue, right? It sort of makes some sense. So we might continue to see 2.5 millimeters a year. So that's going to cause our frequency of flooding to increase. We also know that there are some federal agencies, and this is a study put out by NOAA and the Army Corps of Engineers. They collaborated, which you don't always see, on a report that provided lots of different sea level rise projections, you know, based on models that they had their hands on. So continuation of historical trend, ocean warming plus some amount of ice melting. But you can see that you know, there's different projections that are out there, and it's our job to consider those when we look at solutions, because if we're going to be proposing hardening a seawall or a bulkhead or putting in some sort of flood control system, we want to make sure that our concept drawing shows it high enough, not just for today, but also for 50 years from now. That's our job, to make sure that our drawings are appropriate for that. This grant actually mentions using the Nature Conservancy's sea level rise projections, which came out a couple years before that Army Corps Engineers manual. But the projections are pretty similar, and it's our job to also make sure that we're using the best projections. And we've checked, and the Nature Conservancy's coastal resilience tool projections are in general about the same. So this table shows you some of the increases that we're using for this risk analysis. And the way that we're using this coastal resilience viewer tool is we can plug in categories of storms, like Category 2 hurricane, with 2020s, 2050s, or 2080s, 3 decades, and we can see what sort of combinations of hurricane surge and sea level rise will look like in that time. Do any of you live in this area? Some of you must, right? It's already, you know, in a really high tide, what happens there? See some water maybe coming up? So not a surprise to see that if you plug in a category, a combination of storms or no storms and future sea level rise for this area, you'll see a depiction of some water on the roads in this neighborhood. So this one on the right-hand side is a no-storm 2020s daily high tide flooding. So what the tool is telling us is 10 years from now, even without a storm, just maybe perhaps a new moon or a full moon high tide could show you some water in those areas. And I suspect that's not a huge surprise to people that live there. So far, nothing new here that you haven't perhaps thought of on your own. And you could also, so the map is showing the no storm, but if you're using Category 2 or Category 3 hurricane, we would show more water in that area, perhaps. So this is another view. This is the 2080s projection for sea level rise combined with just a daily high tide. So you'll see progressively more blue in that area. That's a potential thing that we need to think about designing for, right? And we've started to think about, as part of this plan, what would we propose for this neighborhood? It could be some sort of levee or dike system combined with pumping stations, or it could be that everybody elevates their homes, or it could be both. It could be some combination of those things. I'm going to take a quick break and sit down and let Scott Choquette from Dewberry speak. They are a subcontractor on this, and they bring in a lot of expertise with wave run-up modeling, and he's going to talk about how we're looking at that data as well.
All right, thanks, Dave. So the maps that Dave just showed and everything that we sort of talked about so far, we've been focused on flood elevations and what's going to happen to them in the future with sea level rise. And generally, when we talk about those elevations, we're talking about a combination of everyday overland flooding with storm surge on top of it. And the Nature Conservancy tool uses what we refer to as a kind of a bathtub model. It takes the level or the elevation of the water and it plugs it into the terrain and you can see where it goes. All right, so as we ultimately, with your input, pick resiliency focus areas that we're going to look at closer. When we get to that point, we're going to need to consider a lot of other elements. So the next several slides, about 10 or so, we're just going to give a couple of examples of how different wave-related components change things in different locations. So up here, just briefly, you'll see the dark blue on the top graphic is the still water elevation. So that is the flood, whichever frequency you're talking about, and whichever sea level rise scenario you're talking about, with surge on top of it. But in addition to that, you get actual waves in the velocity zone, what we call wave setup, wave run-up, and overtopping. And if you look at the bottom graphic, the red line indicates the still water elevation that we frequently talk about, and then the blue line indicates various different scenarios that could happen in areas with waves. All right, so the next area the first area we're gonna look at, and they're quite similar, is Walnut and Wildermere Beach. And the basis for this discussion is the August 10th, 2015 preliminary flood insurance rate map produced by FEMA. We're going to talk about some other data too. But just quickly, the areas in red on the map are the velocity zones, or zones where wave action will occur. The areas behind that are inland or coastal A zones, so areas where wave hazards are not mapped. The green circles that you can see are repetitive lost properties in town, and that's why we've chosen to focus in that area, and in particular on transect 2. There's transects along the shoreline that we use when we do the studies, and associated with each transect is more information than you actually see on the map. All right, so at transect 2 at Wildermere Beach, you'll see the ground profile, which is the blue line. The green line is that still water elevation with wave surge, and then the yellow line is total water level, so that's with surge and run-up, surge and setup, and the orange line on top of it has wave run-up, and then the red line is the actual wave area. So you'll notice from the green line to the red line, there's a difference of almost 8 feet in elevation. And, typically we focus a lot on just the green line. Question? Yes, I think so. Transect 2 is the lower one of the two. I don't know if somebody more familiar with the shoreline can pick a road out. Or somebody with better eyesight than me, I should say.
Right in the middle of Wildermere area, what are some of the roads there?
Well, I'll tell you, for the purposes of this exercise, you can see the space between transect 2 and transect 3. There's not even enough difference in that particular area to present them separately. So we'll get you an answer at the end of the meeting. All right, so this is the information we have at transect 2. My closing point is just between the still water elevation and the different wave setup and run-up scenarios, you can see that there's a significant difference in elevation, and all of that needs to be taken into account as we do our conceptual designs in a particular area. This is just one example. Also, the Army Corps of Engineers a couple of years ago concluded the North Atlantic Coastal Comprehensive Study, and that particular study, they used tropical storm simulations combined with wave and surge modeling to come up with their elevations, whereas FEMA's surge elevations use historical gauge data, so there's a little bit of difference. And you'll note they're pretty close. The Corps study numbers are on the bottom for the different scenarios, but we'll focus on the 1% chance, which people refer to as the 100-year flood. In that particular flood, the Corps study with waves was 11.1 feet, and FEMA's study was 11.72, so about a foot off. But I just use this as an illustration that when we go that far into the design, we'll have to look at these subtle differences. All right, so the main conclusion at that particular transect at Wildermere Beach is that wave run-up and overtopping of structures and dunes in the area are the primary hazards as opposed to inundation from still water flooding, although we do have that. All right, the second area, Calf Pen Meadow and Point Beach, the same set of information from the FEMA flood insurance study. We looked at both transects in this case, transect number 8 and transect number 9, because there's some differences. So for number 8, closer to Calf Pen Meadow, you see the center of the road of Melba Street in this case. I'm going to scroll back for a minute to see if I missed that. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have a center line street on the other one to answer your question, but we'll figure it out later. So you see the center of Melba Street, the blue line again being the ground elevation. The key difference here that you'll note is that the inundation is deeper, so it's more. You're still dealing with wave setup, but you have deeper inundation here, even at the Stillwater event, and you can see the spread of the different width of the depth as we go through there. The core. Okay, sorry about that. Got it. I'm normally much more of a pacer, so I'm not used to a podium. But the core study compared to the FEMA study in here, when you do the rounding, they're actually very, very similar. All right, so in this area at Transect 8, the takeaways are that overtopping is an issue here, as well as overland wave inundation. So you're actually getting waves in the area and creating inundation as opposed to just a splash and overtopping. So you have a combination of both things here. And that helps indicate what the proper solution might be, whether it be dune nourishment out in front of existing seawalls or fortifying existing seawalls and making them higher. Yes, sir.
Going back to that slide, and the slide before for Roman Beach, we showed the vertical concrete wall and then a gabion something on the other slide. What does that actually mean? You're going to put a wall up on a beach vertically to stop the waves from coming in, or what exactly does the vertical concrete wall mean?
I'm not sure where you're referring to vertical concrete wall. I'm not.
Right under the FEMA coastal study transect, vertical concrete wall.
Can you raise the question about the container impact?
I would like to know, go back to the Roman Beach one.
Okay.
So those are structures that are already in,
Vertical concrete, there it is, vertical concrete wall, 6 feet high,
Right.
gabion revetment. What do those mean? And then one, that penetrates vertical concrete wall.
Right. It's referring, the question is, on these graphics we're showing, it's making reference to vertical concrete walls and different things. Those are features that exist near the transect in the field, and they have an impact on the wave setup, whether you get just setup, whether you get run up, whether you get overtopping. So when you're doing the modeling, is it approaching a dune with a gradual incline, or is it smashing into a wall and running up and overtopping? So they impact when you go to these slides that say what the primary impacts are in that particular area. Those impacts are created by some of the features that are out there in the field, and these are features that are associated with those transects currently. Correct. Right, and the impact of those current features will impact the solutions that we choose to design in that phase to change the situation. All right, and the last area at Point Beach, this one you can clearly see. If you look at the blue ground level, that is the vertical wall, and you can see in this particular case the impact that you're having. They didn't, for whatever reason, map run up in this location. They just mapped setup. If they had, you would see that going over the wall, but you can see here that the primary problem in this particular location is the actual wave action going over the wall. And in this particular area, the Army Corps' study, again based on simulations, produced a fairly significantly different result than the FEMA study, a difference of 11.1 feet versus 12.4 feet. So in this particular case, we would definitely want to design using a baseline probably from the FEMA study in this particular one. And here at that transect at Point Beach, it's a combination of run-up and overland wave inundation, but it's primarily caused by the waves getting over that structure. Again, the purpose of that is just to illustrate that when we select focus areas, we're going to be looking at something in a little more detail than simply the bathtub model or the inundation-based model that comes out of the Nature Conservancy's tool. With that, unless there's any more questions, I'm going to turn it back to Dave. Yeah. Right.
When Sandy hit, it came from the southeast.
Yes.
And that way the wave hit what we call the ski jump, went over and hit the house. How do you account for like the various changes within 20 feet, 30 feet? Instead of having like a row of vertical walls for a mile?
Right. The question relates to the project size or the sample size, and the shoreline is full of, walls that are 20, 30, 50 linear feet, followed by dunes and other features, and there's numerous bearings or directions of hurricanes and storms that can come through, and each one creates a slightly different scenario. The models are designed to kind of pick hybrids of a bunch of the different scenarios, and the more it's a function of money. Unfortunately, the more modeling you do, the more scenarios you can model, and the more scenarios you can come up with. But to answer your question about the sample size, it's really going to depend on what we're trying to protect and how big the project is going to become. But the conceptual designs and the actual designs that will follow will probably not be, from point A to point B, a mile away, one solution is proposed. It's going to be a mix and match of things to address the very concerns that you raised. Okay, Okay, let us get through the presentation, because this is a general introduction to the project, and we haven't done any of this. We're here to get your input so that we can select the areas that we're going to focus on. So if David can finish the presentation when we get into the discussion, then we'd be happy to talk about Bayview. Okay?
And how many FEMA cross sections are there? There's many.
Yeah, these are just two areas that we used as examples. There's many other transects all along the shoreline.
Thanks, Scott. And it's good to have Scott on board because he brings that FEMA flood insurance study wave run-up modeling knowledge to this that they have inherently. And as you said, there are many FEMA cross sections in Milford, and so we showed a couple just to give you an example of how we use the data. But our job is to look at all of them, and there's one near Bayview as well. So that will be happening. So just getting back to, so we looked at inundation and sea level rise and how that's going to change over time. We looked at wave risk. Now we're going to put all the risks sort of back together and go back to the equation for a minute. So if you can recall, risk is equal to frequency times vulnerability. So we know that frequency is changing, right? So we're seeing storms like Irene and Sandy. We're seeing more frequent just high tide flooding from sea level rising slowly over time. So what can we do with this equation? If vulnerabilities are the same, they don't change, they're static, risks are going to increase as frequency changes. If we can reduce vulnerabilities a little bit, we can kind of hold the risk at bay. But if we can reduce vulnerability even further, risks can be lowered. And we have a graphic for this, which Noah put together. I spent a year just using this slide, then he came in and made this one, and it's much better. So Milford's is at this crossroads, right? If vulnerabilities are allowed to increase, so how can something become more vulnerable? Like a seawall is aging, so it's deteriorating, that's more vulnerable. Or a home is getting older, so it's more vulnerable. Or a pumping station is aged, so it's more vulnerable. If we allow those vulnerabilities to increase, risk is going to just take off. If we can repair things over time and kind of keep them as they are now, risk will increase to a lesser degree as frequency increases. But if we can start to make things less vulnerable over time, we can really kind of keep risk the same. But if we can take something like a house or a seawall or a pumping station and make it a lot less vulnerable, even with frequency increasing, we can decrease risk, and that is resilience. So I told you at the beginning resilience was decreasing our time to recover, but it's also this. Okay, enough math. So knowing that we have to decrease vulnerabilities, these are the things that we need to look at as part of this plan. Social vulnerabilities, economic vulnerabilities, our infrastructure, the CDBG-DR grant that funded this, the low mod income funding source, really emphasizes infrastructure. We have to look at it. So our utilities, our roads, that sort of thing. Our critical facilities, where are they? Can we get to them if there's a flood? Can they get to us to help us out? And then our natural systems, we also have to look at things like tidal wetlands that do protect us and our dunes and our beaches. Are they eroding? Can we put them back? So just a couple pictures. This is where we get to look at pictures. Social and economic vulnerabilities, flooding that occurs. Sometimes there's direct damage, sometimes there's indirect damage from someone else that is damaged. That's what the graphic is depicting. So we need to consider these kinds of vulnerabilities. We need to look at infrastructure. There's a photo from Beachland at just a normal high tide. It's a sunny day, it's not raining. We need to look at how to fix that sort of situation. And we are aware that the city is working on that area right now. But infrastructure is a big part of this. Roads. Which roads should we elevate? Which ones should we pave a different way so that after a storm it's not breaking apart? Sewers, right? We need to make sure our waste can go somewhere. We've got so many parts of sewer systems that we don't think about after we flush the toilet, but they're all vulnerable. So the collection systems, the pumping stations, the treatment facilities, the controls, the electrical controls, are they flooded? Are they blown down by wind? So we need to look at all the components of sewer systems and make them less vulnerable. Other kinds of utilities are overhead lines, right? So something that the hazard mitigation plan speaks about, we tend to think of this as not really coastal hazard, but wind is related to those. Our critical facilities, making sure that people can get out, and that if they can't get out, they have someplace maybe near their home to go. And how can we get to them? This is just a picture, a snapshot of where some of them are located. And, by and large, critical facilities are not in flood zones, that's great. But perhaps you live in a neighborhood that gets isolated and it's hard for emergency services to get to you. So we need to look at that as part of this plan as well. And last but not least, our natural systems, right? We care about them. We all like to look out and see a nice tidal wetland. Where have we put in hard structures that are going to make it harder for those tidal wetlands to move over time? Can we give back some land to tidal wetlands so that they're in front of us and they can reduce wave energy? Here's another view. We looked earlier at some neighborhood views at Point Beach. So we have the 2020s, 2050s, and 2080s scenarios on this map of more. It's just showing more of the city, and you can see not a lot of surprises. Our tidal wetlands, our estuaries, areas that are currently low-lying, will progressively over time just deal with more of that sort of nuisance tidal-related flooding that can occur a couple times a year. And we're going to just look at a couple here. So this is Milford Point area inside that red box. And what we're doing is counting structures, roads and natural systems, parcels that have tidal wetlands, and looking at over time, so 2020s, 2050s, and 2080s, more structures will be affected by daily high tide flooding. So we're taking account of those because we want to make sure this plan can reduce that number increasing of structures being flooded. Here's Bayview. So the bar graph there, you notice there's not as much of a natural tidal wetland situation there, so we don't have that green bar, but we've got the blue for structures and the red for roads. And we want to make sure that over time, we're not going to let the number of structures there rise to a point that's unacceptable. And we're looking at that in this plan as well. So that, we're going to move on and talk about resilience options for a few minutes. I think we still have time. We only started about a half an hour ago. But be thinking about, what vulnerabilities are important to you. Did we miss any? Where have you seen risks changing? We kind of know where the risks are, but where have you seen them changing? Because that'll give us an idea of where we should maybe focus a little bit. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to tell you about we're going to give you a taste of some of the options to become more resilient. We don't have all the answers today, like I mentioned in the beginning. It's our job to come back to you with those ideas, but we want to tell you what we're thinking about in general. So in the 1990s, we really just talked about 3 ways to become more resilient. We could retreat, which means get the heck out of the way. We can accommodate, which would mean, letting the flooding happen more frequently. We're going to elevate our homes, etc., maybe elevate our roads. Or we could protect with hard structures like dike systems and seawalls and that sort of thing. Those were, and back then, that seems like just yesterday, but it was kind of a long time ago in terms of where no cell phones, no iPads back then. It was a long time ago. So more recently, NOAA has expanded that list of options to become more resilient. And they love this list. I think this list contains some things that are kind of obvious. I mean, public awareness is on this list. Of course, it's part of becoming more resilient. I still kind of like the older list. I'm going to go back one more when we had just the 3. But still, we found that over time, trying to accommodate increasing risks is getting harder, right? How long can we live with the nuisance flooding that's occurring? How many more years? So here in Connecticut, we talk about options to become more resilient as kind of a subset of those other 2 lists. We have transportation-related options, how to deal with our roads. Are we going to elevate the roads? Are we going to retire the roads, abandon the roads, put a road in somewhere else? Are we going to pave the road with something different that doesn't asphalt crumble so easily, right? Shoreline management is a category of becoming more resilient and adapting. What can we do at the edge, at the water's edge? Should we put in living shorelines? Should we put in dunes? Should we recreate a dune? Should we do beach nourishment? How to reduce that wave energy? Where can we continue to use shore protection systems? And we know that there are many in Milford, and we're not so naive to think that there aren't going to be some in the future, but there are some that are having a hard time. So how can the city help out with choices in those areas where structures could be failing? Elevating homes is always going to be a part of this. The picture, many of you have elevated and may continue to elevate. So that's always going to be an option. And then our utilities, so stormwater. How do we drain stormwater when there's a storm surge going on? The water's got no place to go. How do we pump it out instead? How do we make our water systems and our wastewater systems more resilient? We looked at the list earlier of what's vulnerable in a sewer system. So many things are vulnerable. How do we take care of all those at once? And are there areas where we need to look at moving back from the shoreline? Well, in some towns, the answer, I think, is yes. I mean, there are areas in Nantucket where they have no choice, really. Erosion is so rapid. But here in Milford, that's going to be an option that we leave as a last resort. We're going to find ways to kind of adapt and get by over the long run without just depopulating the town. That's not the goal of this plan. And when we think about resilience options, we want to think about the scale, right? Because we have countries like the Netherlands that come in right after Sandy and tell us, just build a wall along the whole shoreline or across New York Harbor. And, that's not really going to happen here. That's sort of the big scale on the upper left. We're going to be thinking about the middle in the lower right on this graph. So middle is like neighborhood scale. What can we do in a neighborhood? And then the lower right is site-specific. What can we put in front of this building? What can we put an automatic floodgate in front of the door? So these are all the things that we're going to be looking at for Milford. And so as you're thinking about how you can decrease vulnerabilities, also think about which options seem interesting to you. Which ones are off the table? Should we build a big flood control structure across the end of Long Island Sound? I don't really think that's going to happen, but what could we do here in Milford on the neighborhood scale? What could we do citywide? What could we do street level? So we want to incorporate your comments that we get today to the extent that we can. Take that back and think about it. We're going to develop a coastal resilience plan, pick a couple areas to spend some more time looking at. We're obligated to provide sketches for 2 neighborhoods with a variety of options that they could look at and choose from. And then we're also obligated to look at a couple different pieces of infrastructure, like Beaverbrook wastewater plant or a pumping station or a seawall that's of interest, and provide some concept level design for those too. Perhaps you, so a summary of the questions there. We have a survey on SurveyMonkey. Perhaps you picked up a little card that had provided a link. If not, jot it down now. Also, this presentation will be on the city's website. You can go into the presentation and probably click on the link. And there's also some paper copies of that survey. I beg you not to fill out the paper copy and do it online. Just pick one. And then also there's business cards. You can contact me or Scott Choquette. If you have immediate concerns, definitely contact the city representatives as well for this project. And we will see you back here at the end of March to talk about some of the ideas that we have. Here is just a plain old, without a photo behind it, the link to the survey, so you can jot that down. And that, again, will be on, this presentation will be on the city's website tomorrow. You can just go to this page and copy the link. Noah will be looking every day to see the responses to the survey. So we're going to know if you're really snarky in your responses. We're going to get an email that says, I'm just joking. That won't happen. So with that, we'd like to take comments, and if there's questions that we can't answer, then we bring them home as homework. And do we want to use the microphone and go around? Mention, the sign-in sheets. Yes, it's optional, but please, we ask you to sign in. You can come up afterwards and sign in if you haven't already. All right, I'm just going to start. Sure, do you want the microphone? Sure.
I see the other areas, and we're constantly flooding more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And the city, people don't call that.
Right.
And it just seems that, it's getting worse and worse now.
So the question.
It's not mentioned.
Yep. If anyone lives in an area that wasn't mentioned today, please understand that we wanted to keep this to 50 slides. It was pretty jam-packed as it is, and so we picked a couple areas. I believe there is a FEMA cross-section through Bayview Beach, so that's an area where we have some data. It just wasn't presented tonight. It's an area that we're also looking at through the lens of that sea level rise viewer that we looked at, and Noah, you have looked at it already, and I've seen some maps in the office for that area. So it is an area that we are not skipping. Bayview is an area that we know the city had allocated some funding to do some drainage projects. I don't know the status or what happened, but there are many areas that they were looking at for drainage projects. And it's an area that I can personally say I've heard the hazard mitigation, this is the hazard mitigation committee, and some of them, not all of them, but I've heard them mention the neighborhood, and it is not forgotten. It is one that we will be looking at as part of this plan to make it more resilient. Maybe I'll just repeat questions. Yeah.
As a new homeowner on the waterfront in Milford, is there a resource we can find out how to protect ourselves better rather than looking for municipal government, FEMA?
Sure.
Can we take some responsibility and do things ourselves as well?
Absolutely. So the question is, as a homeowner, how can you protect your own property, your own home right now? And there are many things you can do. There are organizations in the state that can help you, technical assistance. I don't know if this is a good time for you to say a few words. It's more insurance related, but do you want to? Let me answer the question, then I'll introduce you. So you can be elevating, floodproofing, making changes to your structure or to your property. If you're looking for technical assistance on exactly what to do, you can consult people that you might know from engineering firms, or you could consult FEMA. They publish all these guidelines.
Is there one place to start?
So I would start and hopefully I'm not going to have tomatoes thrown at me, but I would start with your city. If you approach your floodplain management staff, they might have a place they can direct you for more information. Always start locally is what I say. But the answer is there are many things that you can do to protect your home, such as elevating or other options. Elevating utilities maybe is all you need to do, not the whole home. In case there are questions, do you want to? Go ahead. Actually, use this mic.
Okay.
And then if you could introduce what's your name?
I just was going to add quickly to what Dave said. If you Google FEMA technical bulletins, it'll come up with a list of technical bulletins, and that name sounds scary, but they're pretty simple actually. And there's a bulletin for almost every type of scenario that you could do on a property. It'll just give you some ideas as a starting point as well. And I didn't catch your full. I'm going to botch up your name if I say it. So.
Right, I did have a comment. Do you know who are definitely in a special flood hazard zone?
Would you mind coming in?
Okay, no,
This one's is recorded.
My name is, real name Deirdre. I go by Grammy. I'm owner of George J. Smith Insurance Agency, and I happen to do an awful lot of flood insurance. And with respect to any homes that are in a special flood hazard zone, and if you identify that you are in a special flood hazard zone, there are things that you can do to your house, particularly in an AE zone, if you're in a VE zone. Okay. Well, essentially in a VE zone, there really isn't much that you can do short of, you have to elevate the house in order to get any rate relief, because in a VE zone, you really can't have an enclosure below, and that's what's basically damming. In a VE zone, if you've had an elevation certificate done, your basement floor or the bottom of the crawl space, whether it's below ground or above ground, that's your elevation of your house. And typically in a VE zone, you're going to probably be 3, 4, 5, even 8 feet below the base flood elevation. And so really the only rate relief you're going to get for flood insurance is to elevate. In AE zones, there are things that you can do. If the first floor of your living space is above the base flood elevation, you could contemplate filling in your basement. If you have one, create an above ground crawl space and throw in some smart vents, and that's not very expensive. So there are things that you can do. You can go on the FEMA website, and they do have some solutions and things that you can do to protect yourself. But the first thing is to identify your flood zone, and I strongly suggest anybody in a special flood hazard zone to get an elevation certificate, because that will essentially tell me and your insurance agent or your surveyor or engineer the things that you can do to your house and what you would need to do. And I have worked with many clients who have thought about elevating their house or doing certain things to their house, and I can go in and I can play with the numbers, and I can basically project what their flood insurance premiums will be. So some of the things that you can do to your house will help the flood situation, and then will also help the premium as well for flood insurance. Question?
My name is Emily Harrison. I'm a program manager for Connecticut, which is a state loan program to elevate homes along the shoreline, right at 12 radius of Bennington. One of the strongest recommendations I would make, and it's implicit built into our program from the state of Connecticut Department of Housing, elevate higher than what the minimum max standards are. You only experience the lowest annual flood insurance premium when you elevate 3 feet above that 100-year flood that's shown on your flood map. So that's really the first thing to understand, because these are not inexpensive projects. I'm sure everyone else you know those kind of look at the cost. And you want these to last a long time, and you want your insurance premiums to be the lowest that they can be. And some of the projects that we've done, we've had homeowners go from $4,800 a year to just over $400. So the annual savings can be tremendous.
And that's a good point, because I've seen situations where people have elevated their homes, and within 1 year, the base flood elevation changed, because during that July 8th, 2013 map change, homes that they raised their houses 3 feet above elevation. This is on Melba Street, and within 1 year, the base flood elevation changed, and now they're at base flood elevation. So, I mean, they're going to receive grandfathering because they had continuous flood insurance, but, you know, down the road, you definitely want to elevate as high as you can, as that town will permit, because the flood zones can change and the base flood elevations will likely change in our lifetime. Question? Yes. Yes. Well, what I do, if you go on a FEMA website, you can go on and you can plug in your address, and you'll get a map overlay. And that map overlay is key, because if you apply for insurance, flood insurance from different vehicles and agents, you know, they'll do a zone determination, and I still find mistakes with them. That's your best source, to go on FEMA.gov, go in the map search, type in it, and then go to the base maps, and you can identify the house, and you can zoom right down, and that'll tell you exactly where your house is.
Yeah, I
2013.
can sort of help with that, I think. The maps that were legally adopted by the town are the effective maps, and those are still 2013. In August of 2015, preliminary maps came out, and they have to go through a comment period and a review period and an appeal period. And I don't know for sure, but I suspect there is probably an appeal somewhere that's holding up the finalization of those maps, so they will eventually be adopted. But for now, the 2013 maps still dictate. I highly recommend, if you do any work, if the elevations on the 2015 maps, for the reasons that Eveline mentioned, are higher, you can certainly use that as best available data. And I would recommend to anybody to do that and look at both sets of maps before you do any projects.
Question?
At what point does the thing elevate a home to the maximum height that would be structurally considered safe? Now, what height is that in elevation?
And people are asking to repeat questions. So the question is, what's the maximum height that's considered safe to elevate a home?
Yeah, how many feet? I mean, you could elevate something, 50 feet in the air if you want, but at some point it's going to become structurally unsafe. So there's got to be an answer. What is the max that is structurally safe? Otherwise, it's pretty ridiculous to put your house up 75 feet in the air.
Well, I mean, the FEMA base flood elevations are 13, 14 in Milford, in that range. I mean, so that's the range that elevations would be anticipated. I really hope we don't get to the point where we're going 75 feet in the air. That would be a whole different structural issue. But at this point, the elevations that we're seeing are within the realm of what a home can take when you elevate it.
You're saying 25 feet in the air?
Not 25.
Yeah, what's the height limitation right now? I mean,
There really is no height max.
there should be an engineered, structurally safe height elevation. If you have to go over that, then you shouldn't be allowed to elevate your house.
Well, why don't we, that's a good thing for us to take back and look at more in this plan.
It can get ridiculous. Every year you're saying that levels increase according to insurance. I mean, when is the level going to get to a point where it becomes structurally unsafe?
Question.
There's got to be a point.
Question noted. We'll look at that in the plan.
Yes. An engineer would get involved and decide on that particular building.
The question is, would it be case by case? And that's sort of true. Yep.
Some standard benchmark.
Go for it.
While we were building, there was a storm, and after a storm, there's usually a buildup of more sand in front of the beach. Does that make the house more or less vulnerable by having more sand built up under it?
So the question is, if there's a buildup of sand after storm, is the home more or less vulnerable? And the answer is, it depends. In general, I think you could say that it's less vulnerable. That the additional sand will be decreasing wave energies, but there may be cases where that's not true, where having more sand could hold back floodwaters that have gotten over it now and they can't drain out. So it really does depend. The question over here. Oh. Well, we have great detailed topographic. The question was, what's the nature of our topographic mapping these days? We have very detailed topographic mapping that Megan uses every day. It's probably 1 or 2 foot contour interval. So it's better than the old USGS maps, although those maps are classic for many reasons. And the FEMA mapping is based on that better topographic data. And I've seen cases, I just worked on a case in the town of Middlebury where the flood zone had to be moved to fit the improved topographic mapping. So how about, we'll get back to you, but someone who hasn't spoken yet, go ahead.
As part of this, I know looking at, but we know this area has been, and our expert on here, so we had significant problems with fragmites in the tidal areas. And from my limited understanding that is impacting the ability of our marshes, tidal marsh areas to absorb the tide because of the way the fragmite is grown and their density. That is impacting what the marshes can help absorb. So we have some minor projects. I mean, Oyster River is one of the areas in Milford to look at that. But if you're looking at helping to mitigate some of the flooding, I think we should consider looking at expansion of eradicating the fragmite.
Right, and the point was we should be considering the invasive marsh species as we're looking at, and we are. One of the things that we talked about, and I said last but not least, was our natural systems, making them more resilient. So that's something that we'll be looking at. Thank you. That woman was.
What's the max height of a house that it can build before you can actually put it up? Because my house is 6 floors, so 30 feet, 32 something.
So the question is, what's the maximum height that a home?
Before you can actually put it up.
Yeah, and I hate to have this kind of answer, but it just depends on the home. Well, I haven't seen it. You're asking basically, at what point would it just not be safe to do it? You're not asking about zoning limitations. You're asking about the building itself. Oh, the zoning. Okay, so it's a zoning issue.
Yes. So our zoning regulations would limit the building height to 35 feet from, let's call it average grade, to the midpoint of the roof, to the midpoint of the slope, not to the high point. But knowing obviously that you've got houses that approach that as an existing home on the ground, that yes, through a variance, through any number of other mechanisms, you can essentially get a zoning permit to elevate the house to above the base flood elevation. The point being is to your point, what's the safe height, right? You've got building code saying do it to the 1% height, the 100-year flood elevation. You've got other agencies saying do it to the 0.2%, the 500-year flood elevation. I think that would be up to you to present that to our zoning board of appeals in terms of what you believe would be the safe height to elevate your home to.
Oh, go ahead. Yes. The answer is if a neighborhood gets together or part of the community to raise some funds, is there a way to match funds with a city or some other entity for a project? The answer is yes. Oftentimes, federal and state grants require a match or look for a match, and that's something that could be done. Go ahead.
There's a plan to dredge the harbor, thank goodness, that's a great plan, I can stop on that sandbar, in my boat. The sand is projected to be taken and dumped into the beach where I live. How does increasing sand dumping increase my risk of flooding? Does it reduce it? Does it increase it? Does it matter where you put in? And does it matter with the way it's coming?
So there's one where we'll definitely have to take that back home and look at the maps and think about exactly what's going on. I can't answer that right now, but thank you. We'll look at that. This guy, then we'll go. So the question is essentially a comparison of Wildermere Beach with Laurel Beach, and what if Wildermere Beach did what Laurel Beach is doing, which is managing the sand on the beach to be there, and the jetty. And actually, so your question is a great question. It's something that I've been thinking about in the context of the study, and we're going to be thinking about that as well. I don't have the answer for you today. Go ahead. Okay. Right. Yep. We are, and that's the silver lining of a disaster like Sandy is money is allocated to these kinds of plans to finally look at things that have been just being postponed. So thank you for that's a good point. Go ahead.
What are the restrictions if money is given out?
Restrictions. So money given out for what? For beach nourishment?
There's some programs that have come under HUD,
Right.
and HUD restricts what you can do in the house, how much you can rent it for, actuals.
Oh, okay.
In your own home, the restriction is you have to live there 5 years.
Okay. So that would be HUD. The question is if, depending on the source of the funds, what are the restrictions afterwards? And the example was HUD. So although HUD is funding this study, we're not looking specifically at how to change housing using their funds, which avoids the issue that you're talking about. What we do have to do, because we're looking at things like beach nourishment or creating dunes, is we have to be cognizant of what the regulatory restrictions are, because the funding is coming from federal agencies. So we'll be looking at that. If you're asking more in the context of if you do a project in front of many people, does that change the dynamics of who has access? That's something else that we need to think about as well as part of this. If there's an area where beaches or dunes are created, what does that mean? Now we've created land in the intertidal zone. Is that meant to be accessed? So there are subtleties to your question that we're looking at, so thank you. Go ahead.
Question. Earlier in your earlier slides, you were saying that some of the grant money is being utilized to maybe improve the community rating system for Milford. And do you have a plan? Is that part of all this? I know
Well,
it's very tedious.
right. So about a year ago, we had a separate grant, a NOAA grant, and actually the Association of Realtors contributed to this grant to put together a community rating system, which is a flood insurance reduction program, to put together a plan to increase the rating in Milford. So Milford has that plan now. So we're going to make sure that this coastal resilience plan isn't at odds with it, but that plan is a good plan and it's ready to be implemented on its own. So we'll just make sure we don't, do something that's counter to it. Question in the back?
On the Holyoke Beach in Vermont, after Sandy, they replenished the beach with some riverbed rock and then covered it with sand. And now the waves, anytime you have nor'easter, the sand is gone and it's just left with rock. The beach is just stone. So are you looking at that in terms of what was done? I think it was the Army Corps who did it.
Right.
And the failures that occurred with that.
So while we're looking at the shoreline citywide, that may be one area where there's a separate grant. We mentioned early on that Milford was holding a lot of grants for coastal resilience efforts. It's possible that one of the other grants is looking at that area. I don't know for sure, but I'll check. Many hands suddenly. Who's been waiting the longest? Be honest. Okay, you, then you, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so I live over in Woodmont, and we did get a grant for $200,000 supposedly for Crescent Beach area.
That's right.
And a $200,000 grant to do a study. I can walk out in front of my house and look over the wall and say we need sand here, and that's really what it needs. The sand just travels down the beach like it does in a lot of areas of Milford, and it all ends up in one area over near West Haven. So the cheapest and quickest and simplest form would be just to move the sand back and replenish the beach, but they won't let you do that. So we're paying $200,000 for this grant to figure out that we need sand there when we really need that money to actually get the work done. So we see this a lot for grants and getting things done. That's not right, Bill? All right, well, good. Thank you.
That's for beach work. Okay. Do you want to? We're good? All right. So duly noted. Thank you. And then you were promised to go next.
Many years ago, when I was a young man, like back in 1959, the Army Corps of Engineers spent a terrific amount of time on Long Island Sound, replenishing the beachfront, from Charles Island all the way down to Walnut Beach. And it held up for a number of years. Is there any prospects of this happening again, or just become too expensive? When they trench, there's, probably goes on the million cubic yards of material in the trench.
Right, right.
The beach at that time when we finished was probably 50 yards wide.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little more in some spots, but still it's going. Everything, all that sand is out, a mile off the shore. Is there any possibility, having the Army Corps of Engineers come?
I don't know. One thing I don't have a direct answer to your question, but Connecticut right now is embarking on something called the Blue Plan, right? Which is going to be looking at that exact sort of thing in Long Island Sound in general. And what we need to do is see where they're going with and they've just started. Has anyone heard of the Blue Plan? Okay, some of you. I think that will be the way that some of that is going to be addressed. But I'll take your comment back and look into it. I don't know the answer right now. Go ahead, both of you, one at a time.
I've been living in Milford for 50 years. I came in 1965, and I bought a unit in the Walnut Beach condo in 1975. So I've been there 40 years. I've seen flooding. I've seen all kinds of storm damage over the last 40 years. Originally, what protect our buildings because, first of all, the mean high water lines were 12 foot higher than that. I did a survey on it. I did a survey on it. Anyway, the shoreline was almost completely eroded to about 5 feet from the building. So what we did is we brought in these huge rocks, which is called riprap, and they're approximately, I'd say, 6 feet in diameter. We got them from a rock quarry that they wanted to get rid of. Anyway, it worked for a while, and then another storm hit and moved the rocks out of here. These are 6 foot diameter rocks. The storm is powerful enough to move them. Anyway, so we replenished those rocks with other rocks. We kept doing this over a period of like 10, 15 years. Now, the latest thing that we did, we hope will work. We got a hold of an engineer that recommended a special trench be done with 500 feet wide a building, the beginning of the first building to the end of the second building, the last building. And he got this trench along the shoreline, approximately 15 feet wide and 4 foot deep. And he lined it with various types of gravel. And then the key was a special kind of grid, steel grid mesh that they have that has been used along the New England coast and also down
Oh, okay, I see.
So that's something we have to find out if this would work if we get another hurricane.
Okay. So I'm not going to repeat that question, but
If you want any one of you to come down and take a look and see what we did there,
that would be interesting, actually. Did you take, grab one of our business cards if you haven't already, and let's connect on that. What, did you ask yours?
My question is, I know you'll be coming back in March. I'd like to know, what will you bring specifically to the table in March? That we don't know today.
Yeah.
And then furthermore, what certainty will you come to the table as far as success or whatever plan you have? That is a huge question, and certainty of Mother Nature interfering with your plan.
Right, that's true. And so, yep, so the question is, what will we come back with in March? What ideas will we have? How will we have certainty that they'll work? And then the second part of the question was, well, I guess I just combined them. My apologies. You know, we've talked a lot about how this grant enables us to do some concept level design. That's great, but what this grant doesn't include is a lot of final design. We're not going to be designing actual plans that can be given to someone to build anything. So I can't say for sure what will be constructed after this plan. That's something that'll be years off. We hope to put the city in a position to apply for some funds for projects down the road by having this plan. So that said, the first part of the question was, how can we be sure that, you know, what we propose will work, and what kind of things will we propose? One thing that we're doing is we want to make sure that we come back with sets of options for different neighborhoods, not just one set of options. So like I mentioned Point Beach earlier, and I said we already started to look at that area, a sort of flood wall that could keep out the daily high tide flooding, or some kind of berm system to keep out the storm surges, or something, a plan that doesn't include a structure but includes elevating everyone's homes in some sort of coordinated effort. So that's what we want to do is the plan is going to give the city choices and cost estimates for the different choices so that any one of them can be implemented. So that's, well, you know, there are going to be some areas where something doesn't work, and we might not know that until so this might be information that will be new for some areas. Like, don't do this here anymore. It hasn't been working, and in the future, it's going to be less likely to work. So that's our job, is to look at changing conditions and what makes sense going forward.
Just to add on to that too, whenever we have these meetings, we hear the comments about we're studying everything to death, we're writing all these plans, and if we could apply that money to build the projects, we wouldn't have the problem anymore. But whether or not you buy into that theory or not, almost, if not every single funding agency that provides the money requires all of the conceptual level planning to be done first, and then we know from experience what we think will work, but you don't truly know until the final design is entered into. So unfortunately, the planning and the studies are a necessary evil to be able to access the funding that you need to construct the projects.
Thanks, Scott. Wait, is there anybody that I've just chronically been missing? Go. That's why I asked, sorry. Anybody? So each of you have, I think, spoken before, but let's go to you first because it's been a while, and then we'll go to.
Basically, I want to touch on something several people here already said. One generator back here. This planning stuff has started since 1981, and that's all we keep doing. If we don't plan, to replan, and replan, and replan. Nothing seems to be getting done. In the interim, while we continue planning, and then somebody's going to come along with another grant to plan after you again, is there anything that can't be done, such as the beach restoration, such as West Davis does annually,
Right.
to help us get afford to bring that up.
Well, and so I was going to answer first with the homes, and then you sort of stole my thunder when you said can't afford to elevate. Emmeline mentioned earlier the Shore Up program, which is a loan program for elevating homes. There are grant-funded elevations from FEMA. I think that the city had a couple that they were looking at, but I don't know. Okay, so aside from what you can do to your own property, which is always the most fail-safe thing because you can control that, beach associations get together raising funds and approaching the city, hey, we've got the match, like you asked earlier, let's apply for a real grant for construction. As far as the question about we're still planning, I think for a long time we didn't plan. I know I heard comments, this study or that study in this 80s, and I've seen some of them, but honestly, for a long time we didn't do a lot of planning. Well, but it's a new day, and there's a lot of funding out there because of these disasters that we're seeing. But the funding agencies are clear, and it's what Scott was saying is this isn't an open checkbook. Show us your current plan. Plan is in a document, but also your plan is in your strategy, and then we'll pay for it. And so I'm a little bit optimistic, hopefully not overly so, that I think the kind of planning that we're doing now, and I'm rambling, is different than it was before. And there's going to be real funding, but only if these entities that have the money know that we're all serious. So it's yet to be determined.
Yeah, in the interim, can we do the beach restoration? I think it was last month, the month before, we had a meeting down in Milford Beach.
Yeah.
Milford Beach, Wallen Beach area.
Right.
And people from Southern came in and stated that one of the best things that can be done right now is to widen our beach.
Mm-hmm.
And if we continue on that, on a perpetual basis,
Right.
anything else we do will just be gravy on top.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something that along that line can be done in the near term while all those plans can be done?
Well, I think one thing that can be done, and the city has a grant for Wildermere, is to put together a design for a new beach. That's something that can be done. But paying for new beaches, I don't know, how many millions? Many. Thanks. Yeah. Yep. Noted. You will go, and then we'll take you right after. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, so the question is more again, and someone stop me if we're totally out of time because we can move discussions offline. So let me know when that needs to occur. But to answer the question, the frustration with study after study, working for an engineering firm and having tried to put together plans for constructing something, getting permits, and then finding a contractor, the lowest bid, all that kind of thing, you cannot get anything done in this world without a plan, a design, and then the grant. I mean, it would be nice to say that there, and I think there might have been maybe a question or an implication, what if we use this plan as the study, and then took the Wildermere grant, which is a couple $100,000, and used it for construction, that isn't going to get anywhere. That's not enough for construction. That's going to be a couple truckloads of sand. So we still have a gap. What's that? It is. But I think, right, but how does, yeah, I understand, and I don't actually know a lot about those grants. I just know about the one that we're working on. But those grants may be leading to, I don't know, leading to a set of plans that can be used to bid a project and construct. And without those grants, you don't get that set of plans, and then you don't construct it anyway. So I get it. It's frustrating. It takes time, but there's not a way around it, really. Go ahead. Yeah. Thank you. A perhaps more articulate answer than mine as to the steps and how they make sense. I had promised you, then we'll go to the back. Go ahead.
The other gentleman that was here that talked about the wall that they built in front of the condos at Walnut Beach,
Right.
made a very good point. If you just come and put sand down, the next emergency comes and washes the sand away. At some point in time, you're just going to have to replace the sand. If you want a permanent solution, and you're going to need to have structures such as used tires that are encased in some kind of iron or wire mesh, permanently affixed to some solid structure so that when the waves and the water come in, they hold what you put there to protect the beachfront. If you don't do that, you're just wasting your time and money.
Right. The point being that there are many places where the sand is going to just go away, and you hold it in place, and then you have a better shot of it being there. Thank you. I promised I'd go there, then we'll go back to the front.
I'm not an expert in that. They have pipes that get the drain into the sound. They have a flat down there it's supposed to work. Apparently, what I can see, it doesn't really work. The water comes in. It's not supposed to close again. The water takes in with our street, that whole area, you don't see them. Wherever sea level is, that's where they work. The pipe itself, I think you're trying to keep the water from coming back into the area. I think the town's aware of it. The town looking at it, so I just think. And I know that offices, I want to say, people with the fuel box, that's one of our things, but also, even a razor, also, which is, I understand it's a good idea if you have to do it. Now the water comes under the houses, where before it was over where the beaches are. Now the water gets in quicker, it used to flood quicker from the beaches getting flooded. Now usually water comes under the houses faster than it comes over the beaches. So
Okay.
I don't know what to do about that.
No, but that's exactly what we said at the beginning, which is we need to hear where things are changing, what the risks are, so thank you. And Noah's writing all this down, right? Okay, and then I promised you'd be next, but go ahead.
I live on 20 Beach Drive, I'm in an area that doesn't flood from the sand, but after standing, I flooded from behind, and it was because the tidal surge came up through the storm drain.
Yep.
All the way up that water, flooded areas that never flooded before, so the water came from behind us. And it was because of the same thing. The storm drain did not stop the tide.
We're aware of that kind of situation, yes. Thank you. And then you had a comment still, or?
Yeah, is there a clear request for all of the information linked to all of these studies for everybody to kind of get together and
You know, that's a great question, because one of my dreams for this document is to have a place where we just list everything that's, all the different grants and the status of all of them.
maybe that's similar from one post to another, so.
Yeah. So,
Doesn't this get kind of summarized every 5 years with our hazard mitigation plan? I mean, that's the book where it all comes into place. What are you planning on doing? What have you done in the past 5 years that you told us we could do 5 years ago? I mean, I think that's
There's a page in the presentation about it, so when it's up on the city's website, you can look at this. Okay, so were you waiting a long time? Sort of. Go ahead.
I think it's out of your purview, but it's largely the general comments on, I think it would be helpful, actually, a lot of people come to these meetings and they, there's current projects, their own funds. This is more of a long-term look after these big storms about how we're going to prepare for, 20, 30, 50 years ahead. And it's a little confusing for people who want to mix up, just give the opportunities, and maybe some kind of outline or other opportunities where there's different levels of projects going on. For example, in the supplement, in Bayview, a big issue that please go aware of, and I was working on it with us, but it has been many years since Irene when it started, and it's noticeably worse. The street is sinking, actually, where we're living. And, we can't get out of our houses, and it's beyond just the police. This is a project that can't wait for 10, 20 years. This is a project that we've all been, quietly enduring because it could wait for the city. But that as the years go by, it's becoming increasingly very difficult to live, yes, exactly, to live, to have to wait, really literally my neighbors park across the street on any given day because they really don't know what's going on. So I mean, that also, the street levels, I think that's part of human benefit of being unfortunately a long-term plan rather than short-term plan. Many of the streets don't require, I don't believe require a lot of utility changes or whatever. It's basically about just adding on to the top and getting them higher. And that's something that considering that,
Right.
we also want to consider. I don't think a lot of people in our neighborhoods are also old-timers. The fact that we've lost Jenny's and haven't been able to replace it has been a big thing. I don't think we're ever going to be able to replace Jenny's, as was mentioned earlier. There are a huge number of people that would be for ideas like that in the community. Without that.
I just want to add to this, and you're absolutely correct, being from Bayview, and I've got pictures, and the mayor has been down there recently in July. I know everyone saw what happened, but this is not a once-a-month or a year or once every month. This is going on a weekly basis. I miss work. I can't get out of the house. I can't get to my house. I can show you month to month, every other week, the situation that's happening down there. They just put in two, actually, on that street, Westland Avenue, Milford, Deerfield, the drainage that was put in. They didn't even pave around it, so it's slumping in, and actually it's gotten worse, because I can show you pictures from July, right through now, the difference, and it's not better, it's actually worse. So, to continue doing this and putting good money at bad stuff, and we're still not fixing the problem.
Right.
It's shame on this club, and I have to say that. And I'm not just some kid that just came from home. I think it's trying to really get
Yeah.
my family. And we have one room in the house, I can't really move. So, I don't know what we're doing down here, and I know maybe it's kind of a little bit stepchild, but, and there's a lot of other areas that are doing something as well. But I think you need to get down there, there's numerous letters that are written from our particular area, and I can share those letters with the community, that's some of the emotions that have.
Okay.
Come with a fire truck and you or get your jacket in the house.
Thank you. That's good input. And I think you actually helped answer the question from the gentleman in the front, which is, this all sounds like the same old, same old. That's the whole point, is this is not supposed to be. We're supposed to be thinking outside the box, problems that are not being addressed the same way as always. So we're going to be looking at Bayview, yes. We'll go to the two of you, then back to the front, and then the back two.
Share
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of ideas out there how to best catch sand. Everyone's got an idea. Let's go to the man in the blue and the woman in the back, and then we'll go back to the front. Right. Right. And I think the two big messages, and we kind of already knew this coming into it, is it's that, but it's also what you're describing. Which is not a wave action, it's an everyday I can't get to work. So we've got to try to find a way to look at both of those. So thank you for your points. Go ahead. Thank you. And you know what? I wish you had just interrupted and said that earlier when there were more people here. I apologize. I didn't realize that you were from there. Go ahead.
Or they take a problem that really was a problem and they make it worse by
I think that I can't comment on that specific one. Maybe it happens sometimes, maybe it doesn't happen sometimes, hopefully. What I wanted to comment on was the earlier part of what you just said. I want to make sure that everyone understands that elevating buildings and floodproofing is always going to be part of this. I would disagree with you. I think that elevating buildings is your first line of defense. It's what you can control on your own. It's what you can do right now. You can get a loan from Shore Up. You can get a grant from FEMA. That's never going to not be part of this. But there will be other solutions that are neighborhood or regional scale too that will help. I would not agree with it being a Band-Aid, but I think it's one of the things that has to be.
According to your slide, 2.58 millimeters, the water level is rising according to the FEMA. Okay, so you raise your house up, let's elevate it. So at some point down the road, 10, 25, 30 years, now you're going to be at the water level again. So maybe you can get by then, you won't care.
We can go offline on that. You went recently, so go ahead.
In reference to the bathing situation, I lived on Western Avenue, Field Court, 43 years. I've seen one as it occurred. After Hurricane, well, before Hurricane Milford, they had flapper valves at the end of the street drains. Over the years, Hurricane Gloria come in, they decided to put in what they call fish valves. Those fish valves, over the years, restricted the drainage from the street and rotted out the pipes. For the 5 years before Hurricane Gloria, we were constantly getting feedback because the fish valves were wedged open, so the water came back. When they had the valves, what we call a flapper valve, before Gloria, there was never any feedback. They always stayed closed. And the only water that got on the street, which of course is lower than where the houses are, if it came over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And that was up Deerfield, Westland, all along that area.
So your comment really.
5 years before Gloria, before Sandy, that one pipe on Westland Avenue was patched 5 times, never replaced. That pipe, and I'm sure the others along the line are all rotted out. So the water just naturally comes back.
Yeah.
We finally replaced it with the flapper valves, but then Gloria came in, wiped them out, and they were never replaced correctly.
Okay.
So the water is just open, come and go as it pleases.
I suspect there might be other areas like that as well. Go ahead.
Those valves should, if they're put in correctly right now, should keep that water. I don't believe any other
I think what we're gonna. If I could butt in for a second, just so that people probably want to go home and go to sleep, and they are feeling like they're going to miss something, so they're staying. So why don't we bring the discussion kind of more individual now, so people can leave if they want to, but if you guys want to stick around and discuss with all of us, you can. So I think we'll close the overall meeting. People are comfortable with that?
I just want to make one more comment, if I may.
Okay.
Based on everything that I've heard here tonight, I think the most important
Okay. Thank you. All right. All that, but let me check. Oh, you know what though? I was going to say.